James Garner, star of TV and the big screen, has died, but he leaves behind decades of work for the world to keep enjoying.
To let him catch me act, it's really, what I strive for is to make people think that's the first time.
When people talk about Hollywood legends, James Garner's name usually comes with a smile. He was the laid-back charmer, the smooth-talking gambler from Maverick, the tough but fair detective from the Rockford Files. But behind that easygoing charm was a man shaped by trauma, a man who didn't play games behind the scenes. And when it came to Steve McQueen, Hollywood's rebel king, Garner didn't hold back. Because while The Great Escape made them both icons, behind the camera, it was war. What started as a clash of egos turned into one of Hollywood's most shocking rivalries. One so intense, Garner kept it quiet for decades. Now, long after both men have passed, the truth is finally coming out. From drunken poker fights to jealousy-fueled sabotage, to a final memoir where Garner said what everyone else was too afraid to. This isn't the story fans grew up believing. It's the one McQueen never wanted told. And it all starts with a childhood so brutal, it almost broke James Garner before he ever got to Hollywood. James Garner was the kind of actor people trusted. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't controversial, he was real. But that calm, grounded presence, it came from surviving a childhood most wouldn't make it out of. Born James Scott Baumgartner in 1928 in Norman, Oklahoma, Garner's early years were anything but stable. He was just 5 when his mother died, tragically, during a botched medical procedure that was quietly swept under the rug. That loss shattered his world, and things only got worse. His father, overwhelmed by grief and financial pressure, turned to alcohol. Their family's hardware store burned down, and instead of rising from the ashes, Weldon Baumgartner spiraled, leaving his 3 boys to fend for themselves in the ruins of a broken home. When Garner's father eventually remarried, things should have gotten better. They didn't. His new stepmother, Wilma, was cruel in ways that still feel unthinkable. She beat the boys with sticks, humiliated them by dressing them in girls' clothes, punished them for things no child should be punished for. James, quiet, observant, and growing more furious by the day, finally snapped at 14. During one especially violent beating, he fought back, overpowered her, and in that terrifying moment, had his father not intervened, Garner later admitted he might have gone too far. Soon after, Weldon abandoned the family completely. James and his brothers were left alone, no money, no food, and no protection. But here's the thing, instead of breaking, Garner hardened. He became resilient, wary, calm under pressure, the kind of man who didn't rattle easily. Not in war, not in Hollywood, and certainly not around big egos like Steve McQueen. What happened in that house, the violence, the abandonment, turned Garner into a survivor. And that survival instinct would follow him everywhere, including to a war zone thousands of miles from home. Because right after his teenage years ended, James Garner was drafted, and what happened on the battlefield would haunt him and shape him even more. James Garner wasn't just tough, he was built from trauma, tested by war, and still came out standing. In 1950, at just 22 years old, Garner was drafted into the U.S. Army. Like many young men of his generation, he didn't get a choice. He was shipped off to Korea, one of the most brutal, overlooked wars in American history. What happened next changed everything. Just 2 days after arriving, he was hit by shrapnel from a mortar blast. No time to get used to the front lines, no time to process, just instant pain, chaos, blood. Months later, he was wounded again, this time by friendly fire. Both injuries were serious enough to earn him 2 Purple Hearts. But you wouldn't hear that from Garner. He never bragged, never played the hero. In fact, most people didn't even know he'd seen combat, because Garner believed in keeping things quiet, modest, humble. But buried in those war stories were moments that sound almost unbelievable. Like the time his garlic allergy, something he developed during service, may have saved his life. One night, his unit's meal was unknowingly poisoned. Everyone ate it, except Garner. Why? Because the food smelled like garlic, and he couldn't stand the stuff. It wasn't just a fluke. That same sensitivity ended up saving others too. While on night patrol, he caught a faint scent of garlic on the wind, something the North Korean soldiers were known for eating in large amounts. He raised the alarm, and his unit ambushed an approaching enemy force that could have wiped them out. Smell saved lives. That's how tuned in Garner had become. But even beyond the bullets and battlefield near misses, the war shaped him. It gave him an edge, a calm under pressure, a sense of control, even in chaos. And when he came home, he didn't chase fame. He pumped gas, laid carpets, modeled underwear for extra cash. No Hollywood dreams yet. No Maverick, no Rockford. Just a man trying to survive again. This time in the civilian world, until one random encounter pulled him into a new war zone, the cutthroat world of show business. James Garner didn't grow up dreaming of the spotlight. He didn't take acting classes, didn't chase fame, didn't think of Hollywood as anything more than something that happened to other people. He was working odd jobs to survive, pumping gas, laying carpets with his father, when fate took an unexpected turn. One day he crossed paths with Paul Gregory, a theatrical agent with a sharp eye for talent. Gregory saw something in Garner, something the struggling veteran didn't even see in himself. He told him to try acting. Garner shrugged it off. He didn't think he had it. No confidence, no connections, no experience. But years later, when he saw Gregory's name on the door of an agency office, something clicked. He walked in, reintroduced himself, and just like that, the door cracked open. His first gig? A non-speaking role in a stage production of the Caine Mutiny court-martial. He didn't say a word, just stood there on stage every night, soaking in the energy, learning. Then came TV roles. Then came his breakout. In 1957, Warner Bros. Cast him as Brett Maverick in the new Western series Maverick, and that changed everything. Unlike the stoic, gunslinging heroes of the time, Garner played Maverick as a clever, reluctant gambler who used brains over bullets. He brought charm, sarcasm, and wit. The audience loved it. Almost overnight, Garner became a household name. But behind the scenes, cracks were already forming. Despite the show's massive success, Garner was earning a fraction of what big movie stars pulled in, just $1,250 a week. And when a writer's strike brought production to a halt in 1960, Warner Bros. Made their move. They claimed he wasn't working, stopped paying him, and laid him off. Garner wasn't just stunned, he was furious. He'd carried the show, carried the ratings, and now they were tossing him aside? That's when he did something almost unheard of at the time. He sued the studio. Hollywood insiders thought he was finished. No one beat the studios. No one sued Warner Brothers and walked away stronger. But James Garner did. And when he won that case, it wasn't just a legal victory. It was a statement. He wasn't going to be pushed around. Not by executives, not by anyone. He walked away from Maverick on his own terms. But Warner Bros. Wasn't done with the character just yet. And what they did next was borderline shameless. James Garner walked away from Maverick with his head held high. He had stood up to Warner Brothers, beaten the system, and walked out a free man. But studios don't forget, and they don't like being embarrassed, especially not by a TV actor who dared to bite the hand that fed him. So Warner Brothers decided to get even. They weren't ready to kill Maverick. It was still a ratings hit. The audience still tuned in every week. They just needed someone who could replace Garner, or at least look like him. Enter Robert Colbert, a young, clean-cut actor who bore an uncanny resemblance to Garner, almost like a stunt double pulled from casting. The studio dressed him in Brett Maverick's wardrobe, told him to copy Garner's voice, his mannerisms, even his facial expressions, then renamed him Brett Maverick and threw him in front of the cameras. Colbert, to his credit, hated every second of it. He later joked, "I'd rather play a woman named Brenda than try to be a carbon copy of James Garner." But Warner Brothers didn't stop there. They introduced another Maverick, Bo Maverick, played by a young, unknown actor named Roger Moore. Yes, that Roger Moore, the future James Bond. They thought rotating different Maverick cousins, Brett, Bart, Bo, Brent, would keep the show afloat. But something was off. None of the new characters had the same spark. None of them had Garner's charm. And worse, the studio made a critical mistake. The Mavericks never appeared together in the same episodes. Instead of building chemistry and camaraderie, the show became fractured. Scattered storylines, disconnected arcs, and a growing sense that the heart of the series was missing. Eventually, the replacements fizzled. Viewers lost interest, and Maverick faded. Behind the scenes, another near miss added to the studio's regrets. Before Roger Moore accepted the role, Warner Brothers had approached another rising star for the part, Sean Connery. Yes, that Sean Connery. He flew to Hollywood for talks, then walked away, choosing a different franchise instead, one that would change cinema forever, James Bond. Warner Brothers didn't just lose James Garner, they nearly missed out on two legends. But while Maverick was imploding, Garner wasn't looking back, because another opportunity was waiting, one that would put him face to face with an even bigger star and ignite one of the most intense rivalries in Hollywood history. After the dust settled from Maverick, James Garner wasn't scrambling for work, he was climbing. Hollywood had taken notice. He wasn't just a charming TV star anymore, he was a bankable name. And in 1963, he landed what would become one of his most iconic film roles, The Great Escape. It was a World War II epic, a daring tale of Allied prisoners planning the ultimate breakout from a Nazi camp. And it boasted one of the most stacked casts of the decade: Richard Attenborough, Charles Bronson, James Coburn, and Steve McQueen. The king of cool. But behind the scenes, there was nothing cool about what went down between Garner and McQueen. Garner played Henley the Scrounger, a slick, street-smart operator who charmed guards, secured supplies, and kept the escape plan alive. It was a role tailor-made for Garner's effortless charisma, and audiences ate it up. Too much, in fact, because as the cameras rolled, McQueen, cast as the rebellious Cooler King, started getting nervous. He watched Garner steal scenes with quiet ease. No showboating, no stunts, just pure magnetism, and McQueen couldn't stand it. He began pushing for changes, bigger moments, more screen time, flashier scenes. Director John Sturges was caught in the middle. The tension on set? Palpable. McQueen demanded that his character be rewritten to appear more heroic. He wanted an escape, a stunt, a spotlight. And that's how one of the most iconic moments in movie history was born: McQueen's legendary motorcycle jump. It wasn't in the original script. It wasn't part of the true story. It was added just to give McQueen the edge, to appease his growing frustration that Garner's cool confidence was outshining him. Garner, meanwhile, kept his cool. He didn't throw tantrums, didn't demand rewrites. He just played the role, and played it well. But behind the scenes, something had shifted. McQueen's insecurities had turned to resentment. And what started as quiet competition on a film set would grow into something far more personal. Because while The Great Escape became a cinematic milestone, for James Garner, it was the start of a rivalry that would simmer for years, until he finally broke his silence and told the truth about Steve McQueen. For decades, James Garner kept quiet. He didn't take cheap shots in interviews, didn't air dirty laundry, didn't try to settle scores in public, but privately, he never forgot what happened on The Great Escape set. And when he finally opened up, long after Steve McQueen had passed, it was clear the charm was real, the tension was real, and so was the resentment. In his 2011 memoir, The Garner Files, James Garner finally pulled back the curtain about McQueen. He didn't hold back. He called McQueen a pain in the ass, said working with him was like walking on eggshells, compared him to Marlon Brando, difficult, moody, obsessed with image. To Garner, McQueen wasn't a real actor, he was a movie star. There's a difference. Where Garner relied on depth, instinct, and emotion, McQueen relied on posing, the squint, the silence, the carefully crafted rebel act. Garner saw through it. And that's what bothered McQueen the most. He knew Garner didn't buy the myth, didn't care about the swagger or the sunglasses or the press, and when Garner's character quietly stole scenes without trying, without needing to be the coolest guy in the room, that infuriated McQueen. Garner also shared something more personal, that McQueen was deeply insecure. According to Garner, McQueen's wife Neil once confided in him, told him Steve was tormented by jealousy, convinced she was cheating, even when there was no reason. That paranoia bled into everything, even into Garner's friendship with her. At one point, McQueen accused Garner of trying to sleep with his wife. Garner was floored. It wasn't just wrong, it was paranoid, baseless, and insulting. Garner brushed it off. But he never forgot it. Even the director of The Great Escape, John Sturges, saw the writing on the wall. When McQueen's behavior got too disruptive, he considered shifting the entire focus of the film away from McQueen and toward Garner. Garner declined. He didn't want to humiliate anyone or cause chaos, but the fact that it was even considered said everything. This wasn't just a clash of egos, it was a quiet, cold war between two Hollywood giants. One built on talent and calm, the other on style and insecurity. And Garner, he walked away with the receipts. James Garner was known for his charm, but beneath the smile was a man who didn't suffer fools. And in the Garner Files, he let it all out. If anyone thought Garner was soft-spoken or afraid to ruffle feathers, they hadn't read his book, because when it came time to reflect on his career, he didn't sugarcoat a thing. He took aim at studio heads, co-stars, and the Hollywood machine that tried to control him. One of his harshest targets? Jack Warner, the legendary studio mogul behind Warner Brothers. Garner described him as one of the rudest, most disrespectful men he'd ever met. Not because Warner was tough, but because he treated actors like disposable products, puppets, not people. Garner also didn't hold back on Charlton Heston, calling his acting wooden and stiff. He respected Heston's career, but not his performances. He said what most in Hollywood were thinking, but never dared to say aloud. And then there was Charles Bronson. Garner and Bronson had worked together on The Great Escape, but off camera, the respect was non-existent. During a poker game at Garner's home, Bronson refused to honor a losing bet with a struggling extra, someone just trying to make ends meet. Garner demanded he pay. Bronson refused. Tempers flared, and for a moment, things nearly turned physical. The bad blood didn't end there. Years later, they ran into each other at a restaurant. Neither said a word, just a cold, silent stare. A standoff that made it clear, some grudges never fade. But Garner wasn't just blasting others. He turned the spotlight on himself, too. He admitted to experimenting with substances like MJ and even white powder. He recalled doing lines with John Belushi, laughing at how absurd it all was. Not as a badge of honor, not as a scandal, but as a reminder that even the most grounded stars have wild chapters. He also opened up about his political views, fiercely liberal, proudly outspoken. He admired Adlai Stevenson, he supported Barack Obama. In an industry full of people-pleasers, Garner never hid who he was. He didn't chase image. He didn't pretend, whether it was feuding with Bronson, calling out Jack Warner, or standing his ground against McQueen. Garner lived by one code: be real. And that same honesty would shape the role that defined his career more than any other. By the 1970s, James Garner was a household name. But he wasn't looking to coast. He was looking to create something new, something his. Enter the Rockford Files, a private eye show like no other. Gone were the polished suits and bulletproof detectives. Jim Rockford was messy. He lived in a trailer. He wore rumpled clothes. He dodged bills. He hated violence and barely made rent. And audiences loved him for it. Premiering in 1974, the Rockford Files flipped the genre on its head. Garner's Rockford wasn't a superhero. He was a guy just trying to get by. Flawed, funny, frustrated, and completely unforgettable. But what made the show really work? Garner didn't just act, he lived it. He performed many of his own stunts, including intense car chases that became the show's signature. The gold Pontiac Firebird, that wasn't just a prop, it was part of his identity. But that physical commitment came at a steep cost. By the show's 6th season, Garner's body was breaking down. Years of stunts had left his back and knees in constant pain. Doctors warned him, slow down or stop. At the same time, the show's production costs were skyrocketing. Those stunts, expensive. Those car crashes, constantly damaging the Firebird. Even Rockford's personalized license plate had to be replaced over and over again. And then there was the writing. Every episode opened with a clever voicemail on Rockford's answering machine, a little joke to set the tone. As the show went on, the writers ran out of ideas, so NBC opened it up to the entire building. Janitors, assistants, secretaries, everyone submitted ideas. That spirit of creativity, it worked. The Rockford Files became a beloved staple of American television, but behind the scenes, trouble was brewing again. Garner discovered Universal Studios had been cheating him, failing to pay proper royalties for reruns and syndication. So, once again, he sued. It took 8 years, but Garner won. He never revealed the amount, but it wasn't about the money. It was about standing up again. He later returned for 6 made-for-TV Rockford movies in the 1990s, but the toll on his body and heart was clear. By then, Garner had cemented his place in television history, but off-screen, his battles weren't over. because in his final years, the pain would return. This time, not from Hollywood, but from within. As the lights of Hollywood continued to shine, James Garner quietly stepped into the shadows. He'd lived through more than most actors ever would: abuse, war, courtroom battles, and industry betrayals. But in his final years, it wasn't scandal or ego that followed him, it was pain. Years of doing his own stunts had shredded his knees and wrecked his back. Multiple surgeries couldn't undo the damage. Even standing for long periods became a challenge. Then came the heart issues. In 1988, he underwent major heart surgery. In 2008, he suffered a serious stroke, one that changed everything. The man who once outran explosions and fistfights on screen was now struggling just to walk across a room. But through it all, Garner remained Garner. No theatrics, no pity parties. He took it all with the same quiet grit he'd shown since boyhood. And by his side through everything, Lois Clark. They'd met at a political event in 1956, married just 14 days later, and stayed together for nearly 6 decades. In an industry filled with broken marriages and public scandals, James and Lois were a rare kind of story, the kind that lasted. He credited her with keeping him grounded, and she stood by him through TV fame, war flashbacks, lawsuits, and surgeries. Garner's career slowed but never stopped. He made occasional appearances in TV movies, cameos, and interviews, but it was clear his body had given all it could. On July 19, 2014, James Garner died of a heart attack at his home in Los Angeles. He was 86. The news hit hard. Fans, co-stars, critics, everyone seemed to agree. James Garner wasn't just another actor, he was honest, reliable, real, no drama, no ego, just talent, integrity, and a deep sense of decency that ran through every character he played. From Maverick to the Rockford Files, from war hero to Hollywood rebel, Garner lived a life worthy of a dozen movies. And maybe the most remarkable part? He did it all without ever needing to pretend to be someone else. James Garner wasn't the loudest man in the room. He didn't chase headlines. He didn't stir up scandals just to stay relevant. But what he left behind speaks louder than any tabloid ever could. He was the calm in Hollywood's storm, a man who played heroes without needing a cape, who stood up to studios, outlasted rivals, and built a legacy not on hype, but on heart. And maybe that's why his story still matters. Because behind the witty one-liners and million-watt smile was a kid who survived abuse, a soldier who survived war, and an actor who never let the spotlight change who he really was. He went toe-to-toe with Steve McQueen, clashed with Charles Bronson, outsmarted Warner Brothers, and still found a way to stay kind, grounded, and deeply human. That's rare. And that's why James Garner isn't just remembered, he's respected. So the next time you see The Great Escape or hear that voicemail on the Rockford Files, remember the man behind it all. He didn't just act the part, he lived it.